Welcome to Civics and Coffee. My name is Alicia, and I am a self-professed history nerd. Each week, I'm going to chat about a topic on U.S. history and give you both the highlights and occasionally break down some of the complexities in history and share stories you may not remember learning in high school, all in the time it takes to enjoy a cup of coffee. Hey peeps, welcome back. I recently had the opportunity to chat with A.J. Schenkman, author of Unexpected Bravery. As you'll hear, his book shares the stories of several women and children who served in the Civil War. The book discusses the stories of both Union and Confederate soldiers and what their experiences were like trying to serve. A.J. Schenkman is the author of several books about local and regional history. He has written for many magazines, blogs, and academic journals, including numerous articles on Hudson Valley history in Ulster Magazine, the Times Herald Record, Chronogram, and on his website, the Ulster County History Journal. When not writing, he is a teacher in Ulster County. We recorded our interview over Zoom, so apologies ahead of time for any dips in audio quality. Enjoy, peeps. Hello, friends. With me today is A.J. Schenkman. He recently published a book about women and children who served in the Civil War, Unexpected Bravery. Welcome, A.J.
Welcome to you too. Thank you.
So we connected over social media, given our mutual passion for history. But before we dive into your fascinating book, I am curious, what got you into the field of history?
Oh, wow. Let me see if I can clean it up a little bit. I have always been into history. You know, as far back as I could remember, I worked at the only working farm left in Queens, the Queens Farm Museum. I just always remember, I loved books like Little House on the Prairie or Laura Ingalls. And I was going towards becoming a lawyer at one point after I realized that I wasn't going to be a rock and roll star. I'm just saying rock and roll star dates me. But really what happened is the professor took me aside and said, you seem to really not like law. You seem to have no proclivity towards it, but you seem to excel at history. Why don't you give history a try? And off the cuff, I said, because there's no money in it. And she said, the way you practice law, there'll be no money in it either. And just my parents were always into history. And they were always, we were always doing a road trip, whether it was going to Yellowstone or going to weird kind of places like Chickamauga, Gettysburg. And I remember walking around Gettysburg and you'll either think that, I'm out of my mind or maybe not. You could feel something happen there. Mm-hmm. It was like a real bad feeling, you know, that in so many people, just like you got that from Antietam as well. And also just talking to relatives who had been in World War II, had been in D-Day. And I remember being captivated by a teacher, Mr. Brody, who's no longer around, who was a medic, in Normandy, which the anniversary just passed, I think 70th anniversary. So it's always been there. And, when I was a kid, I went to FDR and it was really kind of captivating to be walking where such great decisions were made and, and maybe some not so great decisions. But that's, I think that's where it all started. And I continued to work at historic sites as I got older too.
Right. Well, then let's dive into Unexpected Bravery. So this is a book that shares the stories of several women and children who defied societal norms and sometimes the law to go into service during the Civil War. And I was struck by how quick of a read it was, but how much you packed into it all. Yeah. So you should be commended for that, first of all.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And so you discuss in your introduction the family trips to Civil War sites, and you've just talked about them a little bit just now. So I am curious, what prompted you to write this book and focus on the concept of women and children in the Civil War?
It was very important to me. I would say I have two books that came out. One was Patriots and Spies, and the other one is Unexpected Bravery, and they were written around the same time, and they were delayed because of the pandemic. And shortly, oh God, I'm trying to think of the time period now. We tend to block out things that causes pain. My father had been killed in New York City. He'd been hit on his bicycle on Northern Boulevard. And it was important to me that, my very young son saw, appropriate grieving and also, but, I was distraught and I needed to figure out a way, an outlet. So I began writing Patriots. And then after Patriots, I just all of a sudden began finding like little hints dropped. I always say dropped by little angels or little gnomes, little quotes here, little quotes there. And it also, what really started it was, I'm looking at the cover of the book, is that students asking me questions. I'm a glutton for punishment. I love seventh grade social studies. I love teaching it. I started working on a doctorate many years ago, and my heart is in middle school. And kids ask me questions. They'll see something. My father said that there was like a soldier, a drummer boy, at the head of the 54th. Is Massachusetts. Is that true? And then, you go back and you look up the 54th and, and then you find there is, and then that leads to something else. And also just curiosity, but both books were also written, I think unexpected, to use a Yiddish expression, pulled my kishkas out, my guts out. And I think it was a way of me also grieving, and just, because I could just kind of pour my heart out in the pages. And I was determined to tell stories about people more than just battles. Because these battles are more than battles. They're the people who fight them. And these people have stories. And I feel like, as a great book called Joe Two Trees, that as long as those stories are told, these people will always be alive. They'll always live.
Yeah.
And some of them, their story hasn't been told. I think one of them is Clarence. He's a very young child, and he's practicing the manual of arms. And he's a drummer boy, and the gun goes off by accident and kills him.
Yeah.
And I think one of my favorite authors, Tim O'Brien, and and he says about these people were children in battle. They're in the Vietnam War. They were 18 years old. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to you're giving a kid a rifle, a musket,
right?
And what do you expect is going to happen here? And and also having a young son, it was just oh my God, I can't imagine this kid running around with a rifle or a musket or even drumming.
Yes. Well, and you said something about how, the stories were of people in the war, not necessarily of the war. And I am somebody who I struggle very much when it comes to rifle company and battle plots and all that kind of stuff. And so what really struck me about your book is bringing that human element and their experiences and what they would have faced and some of the things that they had to overcome. Because I feel like we do a very good job talking about the Civil War and teaching the Civil War, but it is always about the generals, the battle, the over states' rights, slavery, but there's that human element outside of some of the bigger battles, Gettysburg, Antietam, that you lose that a little bit, right? When you're just teaching it kind of broad strokes. And so I thought your book did a really fantastic job of personalizing that very monumental experience for women and children. And so has the Civil War always been something that you've been interested in studying?
I think on and off. I'll find a book. When I was working on a degree up in Albany, I was really interested in gender and society. And I was very interested in how, say, women experienced the Civil War. How I think it was Sherman, who at one point, he says to women when he invades a town, he said, you women wanted this war and you pushed your husbands and sons off to this war and you got this war. I'm pretty sure it was Sherman. But also, as I began to read these stories about people's lives and I began to read about total war and Sherman and Jackson, I really began to become more and more interested in. Then I put it down, and then I kind of picked it up again
Hmm.
and started to really enjoy again. But but I mean, I think it's also like for someone like Robert E. Lee or Ulysses S. Grant. I mean, they're bigger than life. I've always wanted to know. I think it was a Professor Gorin once said it. I want to know the underbelly of
Hmm.
history. Like, I mean, reading about Lincoln and I mean, the mental health situations this guy had himself. Sometimes he wouldn't even carry a pocket knife. He was
Right.
so fearful of having it. And I think that I really, I just kind of want to know what's going on for the average person and how it affected the average person. Because a lot of these generals, they might be affected mentally, but some of them are just from such high levels of society. And I always wanted to know, well, what was going on with the everyday person.
Right.
And I mean, and one of the things too, bringing it to another time, you'll have to remain nameless, but I had an uncle who's no longer with us, but, and we never really talked about him. He was in World War II. We never discussed it. I don't know if they gave him a Section 8, but they gave him a discharge. Couldn't take battle. He just couldn't take it. And he was
Mm.
coming undone. You don't learn about those people. You learn
Right.
about the Bloody Murphys. You don't
Right.
learn about the 10-year-olds like Edward Black from the Civil War, who is, I mean, he dies at 19. His
Right.
hand is destroyed, his arm is destroyed, and he probably died from trauma. That's what the newspaper said. He
Right.
didn't just die from tuberculosis.
Yeah. Funny you mentioned Audie Murphy. I did a little thing about him a few months ago with another podcast. And it's funny because, the story about his bravery, right? But
Going back,
but that underbelly, the kind of the impacts of war wasn't as much discussed then as it is, I think, now.
he slept with a loaded 45 under his pillow. And it's just, yeah, we don't talk about that, what these guys went through.
And so, talking about again these women and children, you mentioned in your book how it was illegal for women to dress as men. However, more than one of the stories that you focused on had women who joined with their husbands.
Right, right.
So, given the gender role expectations of the time, did your research shine any light on why these husbands were okay with their wives joining the fight, or is there anything in the research that maybe illustrates that reaction?
I think some of them, first of all, some of them are written after these people pass away. It's written about them. Some of it's written by them later on. Some of it is, secondhand information. But as far as like Melinda Ballock and Sam, he basically said, "I don't want you to do this. I don't want you to join." But she did, and she joined as Sam. And I think she's the only woman who has a distinction of, well, not only dressing as a man, which is she's not the only woman, but she actually served on both sides, in the Confederacy and the Union. But she did it because if anything happened, she wanted to be there with him. And also, once he switched to the Union, it's dangerous for her to be at home. And we forget that, there's bushwhackers and there's a lot of, this is a true civil war, where if people doubt your loyalty, people are they're robbing each other. There's a lot of stuff going on. Harry T. Buford, who is Loretta Velasquez, she actually asks her husband, and he says nope. And at one point, I think he takes her to Memphis, and he says, "I want you to dress like a man and see what it's like hanging out with men. How dangerous it is, and how scummy men really are." And she's undeterred. And in fact, she dresses as a man. She has a uniform for the Confederacy made up. And she actually goes out to Arkansas and raises the Arkansas Grays. And then she appears before him and she says, "Hey, it's me." And he's like, I think if I remember the book right, he takes the Arkansas Grays, but he says, "You need to go home. This is unacceptable." But others, men and women fought right. They dressed as men, fought right alongside each other. And in some cases, the men died in their wives' arms.
Right.
What I try to also, when you read the 19th century, it's very romantic.
Yeah.
There's nothing romantic about someone dying in your arms.
Right. Right.
And I try to kind of, focus a little bit more like on that trauma.
Yeah. That's an interesting point that you made that, it was while the husbands may not have really approved of their wives doing this, it was a matter of, well, what's more safe for her, to be here dressed
Mhm.
as a man, or to be kind of on her own out in the fields.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so what made you focus on the stories that you did? Was it just a matter of like the most robust source material available, or
I
something
write
else?
about things that move me in some way, like stories that, I mean, my wife always says, you're a storyteller. And I said, well, I don't know if don't call me a storyteller because that means I mess with the truth. So I said, but it's things that people's stories that it kind of need to be told. There was it Johannes Lefebvre, who was in the Civil War, reading his letters where he goes, he's wounded and his father comes down from New Paltz to visit him, and they're being told he's fine, he's fine. And then on the way back, finds out, gets a letter that catches up eventually saying, you better come back. Infection set in, he's going to die. And then his headstone's not too far from here, and going there, and the family's maintained a picture of him
Oh, wow.
on the headstone. And to be there, I felt like his story needed to be told, just so he's not an anonymous person just in a headstone. I mean, those headstones are the greatest primary sources. I mean, they're just stories waiting to be told.
Right.
I think I answered your question.
You did. Yeah, you did. And so continuing that idea of stories and making those selections, several of your narratives I noticed, you said, there's just not a lot. I'm going to tell you what I know, but there's not a lot that I can share because there's just a gap in the historical narrative. So who was your most challenging story to tell?
Oh, I think Charlie King. That's why I named that chapter, like those children who died, or there's just died in a prison camp. I wrote his unfinished lives because that's really what it is. And I always said to myself that it's hard burying somebody, and I've buried two parents. Even I can't imagine having to bury a child, and especially as we're talking, all the shootings are in the news and things like that. That it's got to be, it's really an unfinished life.
Right.
I mean, some people, they live 80, 90 years, they live full lives. But when someone dies at 8, 12, 15, 16, that's really an unfinished life. So I would say Clarence, Mackenzie, Charlie King. It just wasn't a lot because these kids didn't live to an age where they would have gotten a pension, like say Johnny Clem,
Right,
or one of the Hows. So you have to delve into newspaper articles, call archives, see if there are church records, census records, anything. In some cases, due to fire, we run into this with the Revolutionary War because the British burned Washington, D.C. It's very hard to find a lot of information. And also, if you've only been on this earth for 8 to 12 years, how much information is there going to be on you? There's regimental histories, but when I think of these children, a lot of times when I was writing, I was listening to that song by Johnny Cash, "Don't Take Your Guns to Town." But I don't know, either someone will appreciate it or they'll write me an angry letter.
And so when we first connected, you mentioned the story of Albert Cashier. And after reading the introduction, I knew that this story was going to be fascinating and potentially heartbreaking. So can you talk a little bit about Cashier and what makes him stand out?
Well, what is it, from about almost 60 years? He lived as a man. And he's really only found out much later in life, when it comes out that he's a woman, and the federal government wants to know, is this Albert or is this Jenny?
Right.
We don't really care, which I found interesting. We want to just make sure the right person's getting the money, which I found interesting. You'd think the federal government, the Bureau of Pension during the Victorian period would say, we're not giving it to you. I'm sorry.
Right.
And also the people in town didn't really, that he lived in, Sunniman, named after a Kickapoo chief, I believe, which is in Illinois, that they kept a secret. Nettie Ross, who I think is Nettie Chesbro, Albert really was close to their family after the war, and she finds out that when he's sick, that he is a she. And she just, we're going to keep this on the down low. And even when he's in the sailor and soldier's home,
Right.
when they find out through an accident that he's a woman, they're like, let's keep the secret. And they find this guy will work with him, Leroy Scott, and he's in the depositions. And they basically get the information from him. And it's just, he's fascinating. And also he's a little bit of a hero to the transgender community, because a lot of these women, after the war, they just go back to life as a woman.
Right.
He doesn't. And so I believe that's how he wanted to live his life. And there's a lot of contradictions. He'll say, because I know that you'd asked me, did any of them have, lovers or anything like that? He claims at one point, he tells, I think it's Nettie Ross, that he said, yeah, I was in love with this guy. And I signed up, I dressed as in men's clothing, and we joined the war, but and he died. And he asked me on his deathbed, don't ever dress like a woman again, always dress like a man. And he honored that. But, a lot of what Albert did was, later in life, he's senile, but he's also telling different stories when he's more lucid because he's trying to throw people off the track.
Right.
But what's interesting is later on, some soldiers go, oh, yeah, I had an idea. But in the depositions, no one had an idea. And and what's interesting again is they say, and if he was, so what?
Right.
He was a brave guy at 5'3". He was 5'3". Right. And they said that we never suspected it.
Yeah, I think the one thing I walked away from Albert's story was this kind of just the overwhelming loneliness that he must have gone through. And then oddly enough, as he's becoming more infirm and aging, and more people are finding out just because of accidents that he was really born a woman, that they chose to accept him, which again, as I was reading that, I was really surprised. I thought, oh gosh, I thought for sure he would have been put in a sanitarium or something to try to correct him and make him be a woman again.
Now they do that later in life, where they put him in an insane asylum, as they would have called it, because he's senile.
Right.
And this is a time period where they'd also put you, if you could be criminally insane.
Right.
So he, his wishes to live out as a man for the rest of his life was supposed to be honored, but they put him in women's clothing.
Yeah.
In a women's ward, which left him very distraught.
Right.
And he eventually slips and falls on the dress. But I've been asked numerous times, why do I think such a small town was so accepting? I think that it's because there was a human aspect to it. Mm-hmm. Like when you say that someone is a certain way, or they act a certain way, or they dress a certain way, if they're abstract, you can. A quick story. When I was a kid, I had this wonderful teacher, Mr. Brody. He was a sergeant, a medic in, I think I said, in storming the beaches of Normandy. And he talked about, interestingly enough, a German prisoner of war named Hans. And he said, I became very close to Hans. And he said, Hans wasn't a Nazi, because he was a botanist. And we used to swap cigarette and chocolate bars. We had a lot of chocolate bars. They got a lot of cigarettes, and so when he said, when you were fighting Nazis, it's just this abstract thing. It's not a person. Once you put a name on it, Hans or Albert,
right,
then there's a little bit more humanity there. This is a human being. If I'm making sense with that.
Yeah.
But, and also, I think they saw how much he struggled. I mean, if I talk about that he had 6 locks on his door.
Right.
And not only that, he actually would change them constantly. He would nail his windows shut. He was so scared that somebody was going to hurt him.
Right. That's such a recluse.
And again, I think that would partially be PTSD.
For sure.
And I want to draw a distinction between being mentally unhinged from that and being transgendered.
Right.
The two are not connected.
No, no, no.
I
Yeah.
think that the things that he saw, I mean, the opening of my book, we talk about Frederick Grant, that how his father, Ulysses S. Grant, thought it'd be a great thing to show him Vicksburg.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, this messed me up. I really didn't like this.
Yeah. Well, and so many of the stories I felt were so like poignant and devastating. And so I'm curious, whose story resonated with you the most? I know you talked about a little bit about Charlie King, but is there one story that just...
I think Clarence did. I think Edward Black did. Definitely Albert. Yeah, I mean, when Edward Black enlisted, he was 8 years old. And I still see the picture where he has a little handkerchief around his arm because he was a prisoner of war. Imagine being 8, 9 years old in a prison, and as a prisoner of war. And these things are not, Geneva Convention type places.
Right.
Comes in, and he gets sent home, and he enlists again. So
Right.
What is he, like 10? And a Confederate shell blows up and takes part of his hand, his arm, and he dies when he's 19. When he lives at home and he's trying to find work, but it's horrible.
Yeah.
And there's a reason we don't have children, on the battlefields and in wars, even though that does happen. We know it does happen. So, and it's just horrible.
And so you talked about how he reenlisted, and there are several, I think, stories that talked about that, either women being discovered and going and just switching companies, or even kids that, they were told, no, it's too dangerous. And they're like, okay, well, I'll just go to a different company. And talking about that horror and talking about the things that they saw, why do you think they chose to reenlist, having seen what they'd seen? Was it just a matter of patriotism, or was there some other pull, do you think?
Well, I'm thinking again. I'm hearing that song, "Don't Take Your Guns to Town." When they marveled at it, they were, I guess, didn't understand the words. His last words, "Don't take your guns to town." I would think it would be adventure, money. I mean, in today's dollars, I mean, you could be talking about $2,000. How long it would take someone to make, a $60 bounty fee for 3 years enlistment. Some might have been in love. I think of Ken Burns when he says in his documentaries, they knew they were making history. They knew that this was big, that they were going to be a part of something big. And also it was a time period where, as late as my grandmother, in the early 1900s, most people didn't go that far away from home. So here you go into strange places, and as Ken Burns said, they died in strange places called Antietam. So they got to see places that they wouldn't normally see. And sometimes these young children just wanted to be with dad, or they wanted to be with an older brother. And what they found, obviously. And I wanted also, they are starting to, when they join, are mainly drummer boys.
Right.
And later on, sometimes they enlist, or they put down their drum for a weapon. And Lincoln at one point, I forget the year offhand, wants them out.
Right.
Wants children out. He wants the drummer boys out because they're targets.
Right.
So frequently they're going to be targeted by the Confederates.
Yeah. And so as we, kind of try to wrap it up a little bit, once people have read your book, where can they go to learn a little bit more about these individuals and their experiences? Where would you send them?
There's a good book written by, I think it's the Library of Congress or National Archives archivists, Fought Like Demons. There is also Library of Congress has some stuff up online, the Battlefield Trust. And as I tell my students, and I also tell people when I speak at lectures, that this is a very literate war. Unlike the American Revolution, people are making diaries, they're writing letters, and there are so many books about it written by the people who actually lived it. Right. And there's a lot in the newspapers. That's probably where I would start. If if you're looking to, but there are also people that are just so famous. I mean, like Johnny Clem, the drummer boy of Shiloh.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he goes on to become a general. I mean, he stays in the army right all the way up, so he's sensationalized, and so you could always start from something like that.
Nice. And so, what do you hope people take away from your book?
I don't know. When I was a kid, in the middle of the night, I'd always get up to use the bathroom, and I'd always look at this not sign, a picture. I think one of my aunts or cousins made. It was on the wall on the left-hand side, just before you went up to go to the attic. And it said, "War is not healthy for children and other living things." I'm still angry that my father, prior to dying, I think he got rid of it because I want it. And I've always been looking. I want to ask my relative to make up another one. But I always think about that when I'm writing about things like this, that maybe one day, as Pete Seeger refrain, when will they ever learn? When will they ever learn that war is not foreign policy. It's a breakdown in foreign policy. And as we know with Ukraine, we see how it's complete devastation. As William Tecumseh Sherman said, war is hell. And I remember reading some of his work and people thinking he's crazy, saying there's a war, it's coming. And it's going to be unlike any war you've ever fought. It's going to be a total war. And boy, was he right. 600,000 people.
Yeah.
So
devastating. And is there anything else you'd like to share that we haven't covered today?
Buy my book? No. It's www.ajschenkman.com, and there are links to buy the book from my publisher and such. And when actually I was just up at FDR's Presidential Library talking about another book. There are videos up there and all sorts of great and groovy things.
I'll be sure to include the link to your website in the show notes for the episode. And I think before we started recording, you mentioned you were maybe in the middle of another book. Can you talk about it yet, or is it under?
Yes, we're just looking for an illustrator. I spend a lot of time. I volunteered up at FDR's Presidential Library in his home there in Hyde Park and Valkill. And the one thing that really I've taken away from there is what is it, a quarter of a mile driveway, trying to picture FDR after polio, dragging himself up and down that road, trying to get his body to move again. And I think his son Elliot spoke about that. There are these beautiful old trees that line it. And I think about him drawing that his what would you call it? His desire from those trees to walk again, to stand tall, because the one thing that FDR, as funny as it sounds, he just thought of himself as an old tree farmer. And his favorite person to talk about trees with was Moses Smith. And so I think he also wanted to get back out there and see his trees again. And he's even said, there's nobody that loves a tree as much as I do. So there was some kind of inspiration. So that's what the children's book is about. And I'd also like to just think about, I would like to write about my memoirs. I would like to some tongue in cheek. But I would, I've struggled a lot in my life, and I'd like other people to maybe draw some kind of inspiration from that, how to deal with, intergenerational trauma and anxiety and stuff like that. So if there's anyone who's listening to this that would have this published and out there, I'd be so happy. I really want to do books on tape. I really want to do that one too. Tape, that's my age again. Audible.
Audiobooks.
Yes.
Very nice. All right. Well, thank you so much, AJ, for coming on. And peeps out there, please make sure you pick up your copy of Unexpected Bravery. Like I said at the top of the episode, it is a very quick read. I read it while on vacation and was able to bust it out in an afternoon. So it's a great quick read, but it's so impactful. And if you struggle with reading about war and understanding military strategy, and that's what's kind of turned you off of war histories, I think Unexpected Bravery could probably change your mind, because as we've kind of dove into in this episode, he does a really great job of really humanizing the impacts of war, the motivations behind people who decide to take up arms. So definitely everybody go pick up that book. And thanks again, AJ, for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks again to AJ for spending some time with me and letting me geek out about his book, Unexpected Bravery. If you are interested in learning more, you can get Unexpected Bravery wherever fine books are sold. Thanks, peeps. I'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of Civics and Coffee. If you want to hear more small snippets from American history, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to our next cup of coffee together.